Hey guys, Cabin Game Fever here, and today we're going to be talking about the top 10 most expensive games in my SNES collection, and are they actually worth it? But whatever you do, don't tell my wife about this video. Right, before we look at game number 10, I should just quickly say that there are some honourable mentions which I will only mention at the end of the video so that doesn't spoil it, that obviously belong on this list, and if I had them then they would be included, but I don't, so for that reason they're not here, but you'll only find out what those are at the end. To kick things off, let's have a look at game number 10. So without further ado, the 10th most expensive game in my current SNES collection is Pirates of the Dark Waters. This is a beat 'em up released by Sunsoft, and it's actually pretty cool. I beat this one quite recently for the SNES challenge, and I really quite enjoyed it. It's by no means one of the best beat 'em ups on the system. It kind of falls into the mediocre or middle ground of the beat 'em ups that are available on the system. There are a lot of beat 'em ups on the system, and a lot of good ones too, but there's also quite a few kind of average ones, and although I would say this kind of settles quite nicely into the average category, it probably elevates itself a little bit above average. But it's still an enjoyable game, and there's quite a lot of levels to it. It is a bit repetitive. Once you have got through the first few levels, you do start to sort of realise that you've seen most of what the game's going to throw at you, but it's enjoyable. It's got a real arcade vibe to it. I guess it's based on an arcade cabinet of the same name. But it's enjoyable, and I would say that it is probably a decent purchase. Let's talk about price though, because that of course is the big factor. Number 10 in my collection, Pirates of the Dark Water, cost me a total of £96.23, which is quite dear, let's be fair. It was actually quite recent. I bought this maybe a year ago, or less than a year, maybe 6 months ago. So there you go, prices are expensive for this. I remember a few years ago seeing this one in around the sort of £70 bracket. Now my prices, they all include postage and packaging, and I'm pretty sure I had to buy this one from France, even though this is, oh it is, it's FAH region code on there, which I believe is France and Holland, so that would make sense. Now that is where this game was released, in the PAL region. I don't think it took it definitely didn't take a UKV. I don't think it took a UKV release. I'm pretty sure it didn't. It might have had the EUR release, but I've got the FAH one, and I'm very happy with that. It's English language, it's not in French, so that's all that matters really, isn't it? So yeah, postage from France included on that probably would have added another 20. So there we go. Around the sort of £70–75 mark is probably a fair price for this game without postage. But there we go. That's number 10 in the collection, and it's an enjoyable game. Right guys, so the 9th most expensive game in my current SNES collection is Demon's Crest. This is the sequel to, it's actually the trequel, because there was the first game on the NES, Gargoyle's Quest, followed up by the Game Boy sequel, Gargoyle's Quest 2, and now we have Demon's Quest for the Super Nintendo. And guess what? This is a brilliant game. This is from Capcom. It's like an action RPG with, it takes away a lot of the kind of JRPG elements that were apparent in the NES game. It wasn't turn-based in the NES game, it was still action platforming, but there was a lot of sort of wandering around, talking to villagers. I actually really enjoy the NES game, I think it's very good. But this game kind of does away with a lot of that and just goes straight in for action. It has kind of like Castlevania meets Super Metroid vibe to it. Looks fantastic, plays really well, and it's just a joy to play. It really is a joy to play. It's one of the system highlights for me, and it's just once again demonstrates just how fantastic Capcom are as a game developer for original content. Now, price, let's get on to that. Where does this game rank price-wise? Well, this game cost me a total of £100.96. Now again, that includes postage. This one was bought in the UK off eBay, so I guess that is pretty much the sort of price you'd be looking to pay. I've seen it go for a lot more, and I've seen it go for a bit less as well. This is the game that I was tracking for a long time. I picked it up probably about a year ago, off eBay, and I just bit the bullet a little bit. I'd been penny pinching with this title for a while, trying to get it for under 100, and I ended up getting it just over 100 with the postage. So I'm relatively happy with that. It's a lot of money. All these games it's a lot of money for what they are at the end of the day. You have to make the decision to decide whether you think that's actually worth it as an investment. I personally do, and that's why I've gone for a lot of these games. But in this case, it is kind of valid. I do think this is an excellent game, if not one of the system highlights. So that's Demon's Crest, number 9. Okay, so the 8th most expensive game in my current SNES collection is the Fireman. This is a PAL exclusive. It came out obviously in Japan as well, but not in America in the NTSC region. And it is a game from Hudson Soft, involving basically travelling around a burning building and putting out fires. Now there is actually another game just like this from Jaleco called Ignition Factor, which was released in the US and not released here. So it's kind of strange that both regions got their own firefighting game, then neither of them were released in both regions. This is definitely better than Ignition Factor. I do think Ignition Factor is a very decent game on its own. It's actually a little bit more strategy in Ignition Factor. This is much more arcadey, much more pick up and play, but it just looks so good. It looks so good. It's got those wonderful Hudson graphics, kind of big sprites and lovely animation. It's arcadey fun. I mean, if you think that putting out fires might get a bit repetitive, they've done a brilliant job. They've got bosses in there, and it all kind of sticks within the realm of reality. Obviously, it's extremely exaggerated and dramatic for the sake of the game, as is the story, but it manages to keep the aesthetic of firefighting enjoyable and kind of quite thrilling throughout. So definitely a recommendation. I think this one's actually turned up on the Switch Play now, so you can just play it there if you want to. It's quite tough, especially to beat the final boss. It's actually, I didn't find it too difficult to make it to the final boss, but it took me a few attempts to actually beat him. Well worth it though. Really cool game, and yeah, I mean, I'm very happy to own it. It's pretty hard to get hold of these days. Now, price. The Fireman, sitting in 8th place, cost me a grand total of £105.50. Again, that's including postage, and this was bought in the UK, I believe, off eBay, so I guess that's probably a fair sort of price that you'd be looking to pay for this title now. Again, it's one I wanted to always get for just under 100. It cost me just over, I suppose, in the end. But I'm happy enough with that. It's a fantastic game, and maybe wouldn't go as far as to call it a system highlight, but it's definitely hidden gem material, and one that I would recommend any fans of the Super Nintendo who want to try something new. Definitely give it a go. Right, the 7th most expensive game in my current SNES collection is Wild Guns. This is Konami's, what do we call them? A gallery shooter. That's the term that I learnt when I was reviewing this game. Gallery shooter. This is basically a, how would you describe it? How do you describe a bad gallery shooter? It's something that you basically are a first-person shooter from a third-person perspective, I guess. You control a character that you can physically see at the front of the screen. You can jump him around to avoid bullets and various incoming shrapnel, and you can obviously control him and shoot the enemies in front of you. So it kind of plays a bit like a sort of first-person shooter, or a bit like a light gun game kind of thing. You've got enemies popping up all over the screen you've got to shoot, but you're also controlling a character and allowing him to sort of dodge around the action. And that really is where the game's charm comes from, because unlike some early light gun games, early shooter games, which were quite unfair, because before things like Time Crisis, did Virtual Cop have it? I don't think it did. So it's really Time Crisis and a lot of the games that followed, where you had the duck mechanic. It gave you that sort of element of fairness to the experience. Before that, a lot of games were pretty unfair. I think about things like the Terminator and all those sort of first-person shooters that were really difficult in the arcade. Wild Guns gives that impression initially until you realise that actually you've got the dodge roll and you're pretty much invincible whilst you're doing a dodge roll. So it is all about using that dodge roll correctly and timing it well. And once you get to grips with it, my God, this is such a good game. It's really one of a kind, and it's the kind of game that really demonstrates why the Super Nintendo was a brilliant console if you knew how to design properly for it, which of course Konami did. And it really just looks stunning. It looks like an arcade game. It plays like an arcade game. It is, I would say, arcade worthy, really, to be honest with you. I'd be happy to play that in an arcade, really, maybe with a slight graphical boost, but it is just so good. Basically combining the Wild West and giant mechs and robots, long before Will Smith was doing that with Wild West. In fact, that's probably the inspiration, was playing this game. I can just imagine him sitting down. Who else was in Wild West? Oh, my brain's gone. Anyway, I can imagine the crew sitting down with the director playing that for inspiration, because that's how good this game is. Price-wise, what did it cost me? Well, Wild Guns cost me, in 7th place, £108.24. So again, hardly a cheap game. But again, it's the kind of sort of game that I was looking for around the £100 mark, and I ended up paying £108 for it, which is not so bad, I suppose. Again, it goes for a heck of a lot more than that a lot of the time. But yeah, I think that's a sort of reasonable price nowadays. You're looking at around the £100 mark to get a good deal for it. And is it worth it? I mean, it's worth it if you can afford it and you want to buy yourself a quality game, because this is a system highlight, I think. Well, it's certainly a very, very good hidden gem anyway. It may not be pinnacle system material, but it's definitely up there for me if you want to delve beyond your usual trope of, you know, system classics, let's say. This is definitely on the next tier of brilliant games. So yeah, highly recommend it. Now let's have a look at what's in 6th place. Right guys, so in 6th place we have Robo Trek. Now, this game also came with the manual. I didn't actually necessarily want the manual per se. I would have happily paid a bit less to have it without the manual, but you know, it's not really an option that I came around. This is a very rare game. It doesn't turn up very often, so when it turned up with a carton manual, I took a gamble on it. This is NX and Quintet, well, published by NX, produced by Quintet, the producers of the Gaia trilogy, i.e. Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, /Time, and Terranigma. And this is another one of their RPGs, Robo Trek. It's definitely not as good as the others in that list. ActRaiser as well, they made, it's 5th place, let's put it that way. If those are the games they made that I've listed already, this is definitely 5th place. I guess ActRaiser 2, I haven't actually played that much yet. I know a lot of people consider that to be quite a disappointment compared to ActRaiser 1. I'm not even sure if it was Quintet that made that. I think it was Activision that potentially were involved with that. But that might be ranked as the worst Quintet NX game. But this is definitely above that. Now, that doesn't make it a bad game, guys. I think this is actually a really quite a decent RPG. It's the JRPG. It's turn-based, which turns a lot of people off. But I quite like it, and some turn-based games, the grinding is just relentlessly dull. It can really spoil the game. I can sort of look at Breath of Fire sometimes, looking your way. Final Fantasy as well, to be honest with you. Sometimes just the demand on grinding can be too much. That's not the case with NX games. They usually make action RPGs, which is what they did with the Gaia trilogy. But this from Quintet and NX is a traditional turn-based experience. You get to build your own robots, and it's quite a charming little story. I actually quite enjoyed the story on this one. It's not the most thought-provoking story ever, as some of their Gaia trilogy tried to be. But it's decent, it's some fun. I actually quite like the characters, and you basically a little kid, and you can have this invention rooms, and as you level up yourself, you get the ability to build newer robots. It's a shame there aren't more robots in the game. I think that's where it's let down, I think that if they had pushed the robot building mechanic a bit more and allowed you to have different models that you could build, different attachments, this could have really been like a next level of excellent. But instead they went for a kind of basic robot design, which you improve with just weapons that you build or make. There's a lot of variety you can do. You can combine a lot of different weapons to make new things. It's quite techy in that sense, but I quite like it. You know, I've played techier. I played less techy RPGs that I've been much more bored playing, and this I didn't really get bored. I enjoyed it. It's got a nice pace to it, nice story, and it's a fun game. But is it worth the money? Well, I mean, we're talking about 6th place now, aren't we? And this cost me, are you ready? £110 on the nose. Now, I think this one I bought from Europe. I didn't have to buy this from America because, as I said, all the prices I'm talking include postage and shipping and packaging, I suppose, as well. But in this case, I'm pretty sure I bought this one. I did buy this one from eBay UK. So that seller probably whacked on the shipping fee that he'd had to pay himself when he bought it. But looking at prices in the States, I don't think that's too far off what I'd have to pay when you'd include shipping on top, as well as export tax, which unfortunately, thanks to Brexit, is now pretty staggeringly high. So yeah, maybe that's not the worst price in the world, but it is still a steep price. And at the end of the day, this is a game which may not be to everyone's cup of tea. So, you know, you might decide that's too much to pay for a game that's really not excellent. And I wouldn't say it's excellent. I'd say it's probably above average for RPGs. But I still enjoyed it. So there we go, 6th place, Robo Trek. Okay, so we're into the top 5, and perhaps the last game might have been a bit of a giveaway for the type of genre that may well be stacking up a lot of the next couple of games, because yes, believe it or not, rarity and scarcity and demand all seem to be quite commonly connected to RPGs. And in 5th place is another RPG that's a little bit better known than Robo Trek, put it that way. That, of course, is Earthbound. Yes, Earthbound. I think this is probably the most well-known besides Final Fantasy III and, of course, Chrono Trigger. I'd say this is probably 3rd in line for most people's favourite RPG on the system. And rightly so. I mean, this is an incredible game. I was never into RPGs when I was a kid. I only got into them later on when I started collecting again. This was one of the first that I played on the Super Nintendo, and I was completely blown away with how great this is. I just love everything about it, the art style, the story, it's just how original it is. I love everything, the detail that they've gone to create a JRPG turn-based game, but completely strip it from all of the usual boundaries of fantasy feudal Japanese setting with boy must save the world after leaving village. That stuff is just, it's there. That is the basis of Earthbound as well, but they've completely wrapped it up in this lovely little Western egg. And they've just put it in the picture postcard village setting or town setting in America, and it's just full of charm. It's just full of charm. All the power-ups, all the weapons, all the enemies, the design, like even the battle sequences, the sort of psychedelic color schemes they use. Oh man, I love it. It's so cool. Fun story, really wacky. Loads of crazy stuff happens. Just really fun and just fun, enjoyable, good, and epic as well. Like, it really has a feeling of grandiose to it as well. You know, like especially the last section when you finally get towards the end of the game. I'm not going to say what happens, but things in there really make you feel like, you know, decisions you're making are having an effect on the characters that you're playing with. And yeah, I love it. It's just a fantastic RPG. It's one of the best, and rightly so. It deserves to be hailed as one of the best. And I guess when we're talking about expensive games, hey, I mean, I guess it's good to see a really expensive game be really good. Now, in terms of price, I think I was quite lucky to have found this at the price I found it for. It should probably be a bit higher on the list, but for me it cost me a total of £141.68, and that includes shipping and export tax from Canada, which is where I bought this from. And even at the time, that was probably about £100 or so cheaper than what most people were trying to sell it for. Buy it nows and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, buy it nows are not a good gauge of price, but it seemed to be, even, you know, most bidding wars were ending at around £2 to £2.50 for this game. I don't know what they go for now, probably around the same, maybe a bit more, I don't know. But I think 141 was probably quite a good price for Earthbound at the time. Very happy with the cartridge, very good condition, very nice cartridge as well. So very lucky there. Is that really worth the money? I mean, I don't know. Earthbound is a fantastic game, so if you really want to buy yourself one of the pinnacle RPGs on the system, and RPGs are your thing, or even if they're not your thing and you just want to try a really good one, I would definitely recommend this one. It is available on Switch Library, I believe, now, so that's well worth a play there. And it's also a shame that this is the only version that got released outside of Japan, because this is in fact a series of games called Mother. The first one was on the NES, and they released Mother 3 possibly on Super Nintendo, I'm not 100% sure. But I don't think they've had local translations, or at least the third one hasn't. I think the first game has had a local translation now, so perhaps worth playing. Anyway, Earthbound, fantastic game. Do I recommend it? Most definitely do. It's just a shame it's expensive, and if you want a boxed copy, I mean, wow, just dream on, basically, unless you want to remortgage. Anyway, so that was game number 5. Let's have a look at what's next in line. So game number 4, fourth most expensive game in my current SNES collection, is Tales of Spike McFang. Ever heard of that title before? Probably not. I hadn't really heard about it myself until I started researching the SNES library in a lot more depth. Hey, it's a NTSC exclusive RPG, action RPG, which wasn't released over in the PAL region. Like many RPGs, we were unlucky enough, largely probably down to the fact that they couldn't be bothered to do various bilingual translations. So instead, they just stuck with the English version and only released it in America, which is a shame, because I think this is actually a pretty decent game. I'm afraid I haven't actually played it that much yet, so I can't give you a full description of really its worth and whether it is worth the money that I paid for it. But I hear it's good. I think it's probably going to end up being around the mediocre level of games, but I don't want to jump the gun and slam it before I've really given it a good go. So for that reason, we'll just have to put a question mark by whether or not this is actually a decent game and perhaps worth the money. However, you do need to know what it cost, of course, and that was a total of £145.08. So it's only a couple of pounds more expensive than Earthbound, but that included, this was bought a lot more recently than Earthbound was, and it included a hefty shipping and hefty export tax, which is now what you have to pay from the US if you want to buy games. So I think, I mean, that could have been anything up to £20 to £30 there. So this might really be around the £100, £110, £120 region, really, without all that extra additional baggage put on top of it. So really it should be, I guess, probably game number 5, and Earthbound should be ahead of it. But unfortunately, guys, that is the reality of buying games these days. If you want to buy games with import tax, that's what you have to face, man. It is part of the price. Unless you're going over to the States yourself or Canada to buy these games, chances are, if you're buying it over here, it's going to have that on top of it anyway. If you're buying it on eBay, if you're buying it from Europe, if you're buying it from a game shop, they're going to have added that tax on top to the price that they sell it for. So they're not going to be losing money on it. The value that you might buy the game for over in the States on eBay is one price, and then to get it here, unless someone's physically brought it back themselves in their hand luggage or whatever, they're going to be charging you that shipping fee. So it is unfortunately part of the price. So if you're wondering why I keep adding postage onto things and why I keep that price, that's why. Because it is important to remember what you've fully paid for a game, not just the final sale price. Anyway, Tales of Spike McFang, currently sitting in 4th place, and probably should have been in 5th place, but there we go. Anyway, let's move on. Okay, so game number 3. We're into the top 3 now, And propping up my SNES collection in third place with the third most expensive game in the collection is Castlevania Vampire Kiss, otherwise known as Castlevania Rondo of Blood. Is that its an NTSC name? I can't quite remember. I think that's what it's called over the States. Anyway, this is the second Castlevania game that was released for the Super Nintendo after, of course, Castlevania 4. And it is, yes, indeed, it is a port of the Japanese only at the time TurboGrafx 16, well, PC Engine CD, should I say. Akuma Dracula X Rondo of Blood. I can't remember the full title for that one, but yeah, that was the original game. It came out on TurboGrafx CD, and it is by far the definitive port. It has since been released on various collections. I've actually got it on the PSP. So why did I get myself a copy on the Super Nintendo? Well, I don't know, guys. I've just always loved this artwork. It's always been quite an iconic title on the system, and I never really intended to get it for the exact same reasons that I've already mentioned, but I just one day was thinking I want to finish off this SNES collection, and I thought to myself, you know what, I'm gonna get myself Castlevania Vampire Kiss because I really want to play it, and I just want to see the differences between this and the other games, which is a pretty expensive reason to buy a game when you could just play a ROM of it. But I don't know, I like the game. I like the artwork, and how can I say I'm a collector, man? You know, I'm a gamer, yes. You all know I like to play games, and I beat all my games. But at the end of the day, I'm also a collector, and I guess it's going to hold its value, this game, anyway. So you know, if the time ever comes to sell, then hopefully I'll get my money back. If not, it's not the end of the world. I'm pleased to have had it, but it's probably one of the less what's the word? The sort of less important purchases, perhaps, out of the top 10 we've already talked about, purely because, like I said, this is not one of the best ports of the game. Still, it's playable and it's really good. I actually really like it. I haven't beaten it yet. It's coming up, guys. It'll be part of the challenge. But I've played it casually a bit, and it plays really nice. It's Castlevania. It's still really good. I've never played. I've played the PSP version, which is the original, and I know how it should play comparatively, and it doesn't play like that. It plays like a Super Nintendo game, but it's still really cool. It's not worth the money, to be honest with you. I don't think. You might as well pick up a different port or just play a ROM of it. This is really one for collectors, I think, to be honest with you. Now, what do you want about price? So, like I said, at third place, it's certainly a high position, considering that I'm not giving it a 10 out of 10, you know, excellent grade. But there we go. I'm being honest with you guys. This cost me £151.83. That's including postage. It was bought in the UK, so that's a pretty honest price probably for picking up this game. You might get it a bit cheaper elsewhere, but you're probably looking at certainly north of 100 anyway. Maybe 120, 130, but I paid 151. It's probably a bit more than some people have paid. It was bought quite recently, about 6 months ago, something like that, 6 months to a year ago, so it's a pretty reflective price of the market today. But yeah, it is what it is, guys. It's more of a collector's piece than a great game, but it is still a very good game. I want to put it out there. I know it gets stick for not being Akuma Dracula X Rondo of Blood, but without that accolade behind it, which back in the day no one knew about, it's still a really good Castlevania game. So I'm pleased to have it. Right, so we're into the final two games in the Cabin Games SNES collection. Prices have definitely jumped north, but is it really worth it? Let's have a look at what is game number 2 in the most expensive games in the SNES collection. And that is Metal Warriors. This is actually created by LucasArts, despite being published by Konami. Man, what can I say about this game? It is one of, I think, my favourite games on the system. I beat it quite recently, and it is so good. If you've ever played Cybernator, another game that was published by Konami, it wasn't actually made by LucasArts, that one. I can't remember who it was made by, but that was quite similar to this game. You're playing a giant mech and you're moving around inside a sort of platforming environment, you know, destroying other mechs and other enemies and stuff like that. This game is very similar, but the level of detail put into the environments is just incredible. I didn't realise they could do environmental destruction on the Super Nintendo hardware like they do in this game. I love the fact that you can get outside your mech and fly around as a tiny little microscopic guy, get into other mechs. Reminds me a bit of Blaster Master on NES. But I love that you can, there's loads of different mechs, they've got lots of different abilities, and it's just so much fun, this game. It's really hard, but really rewarding, really enjoyable and really rewarding to beat as well. Got a good sense of achievement beating this game, and just a wonderful game. Lots of replay value. Definitely recommend it to anyone who wants to play it. Of course, price, yes, it is insanely expensive, and even a cartridge game like this on its own without the box is just wow, you know. But it is what it is. At the end of the day, yes, you could probably play a ROM of it, and I would definitely advise that would be the best way to play it. I don't think it's been made available on Virtual Console yet, so a ROM is probably the best way of doing it. However, if you are going to potentially buy it, obviously it wasn't released over here in the UK, so you're probably looking at North America. It's time to be honest, I paid for this game £228.79. Of course, as I always say, that includes shipping and postage, and export tax from the US. This was bought about 2 maybe 3 years ago, 2 years ago, something like that. So it's probably again a fairly fair price guide to how much this will actually cost you in today's market. But since Brexit, I think, you know, this was bought sort of pre-Brexit, so it was a little bit less on the import tax back in those days. Nowadays, it's just so expensive. It's almost not worth buying games from America. You're better off just buying a ticket and go on holiday there and buy a load of games. But if you want to buy it over here, it's very rare. You probably won't find it, and even if you do, I'm sure if it's been bought with the export tax and shipping from the US, that will probably be added onto it anyway for your price here. But you know, you might get it a bit cheaper than me. I hope you do. I've definitely seen it sell for more. This is actually, I bought this one on a bid. I ended up being the top bidder on it, so it sold a little bit under some of the buy it nows that were going on at the time. Obviously, buy it nows are not a good gauge of what things are actually worth. Bidding wars are a far more honest way of getting a good idea of what price is. But yeah, it's expensive, very expensive. But like I said, it is a fantastic game. I would definitely put this up there as one of my favourite games on the system that I've played, beyond the obvious classics. And yeah, it's brilliant. But it's a small fortune, and more than I think most people will be wanting to pay for a game. So at the end of the day, you have to make up your mind on this one. It's definitely one for. It's definitely not one you want to buy on a whim, put it that way. Anyway, that takes us to our most expensive game. So let's see what that is. Right, so we finally made it to game number 1, the most expensive game in my current SNES collection, and possibly the most expensive game in my entire collection. I'll have to actually sit down and analyse which one is the most expensive, but this is definitely a contender. And we have game number 1, Cabin's most expensive Super Nintendo game. And we have Evo, The Search for Eden. Yeah, this is a very expensive RPG, released by NX and Squaresoft. It is one of, I don't think it was anything to do with Quintet. No, this is just NX and Squaresoft. It's an RPG that basically takes you through the evolution of a species. I think you start as a dinosaur. The reason I'm a bit hazy is because I haven't actually played it yet. I'm gonna play it. I promise you I'm gonna complete it. It's part of the SNES collection. It's gonna get beaten. I just haven't got around to it yet. I'm looking forward to it, let's say largely because of how expensive it cost. It's also been on my wish list for almost since the birth of my wish list, which is 20 years ago. It was a game that I knew about even way back then, and I read a little bit about it, and I just thought, wow, an RPG where you actually play through evolution, playing as different species and kind of developing them and growing them up. Sounds really, really cool. In reality, I heard since that unfortunately it's not as good as my my hopes for the game. I think that people will say it's very good, but they do say that it's a bit more one-dimensional than perhaps it could have been, which is the case with a lot of RPGs of the era. Which is kind of sad. I don't know if that is anything to do with cartridge limitations on ROM, whatever, but it is what it is, and it's often considered to be. I think that it gets probably perhaps a little bit more praise for being very rare. No one wants to admit that they don't like it or whatever. I will be the judge of that. Again, just like I said with Tales of Spike McFang, I don't want to go early and make a judgment call on this game because I haven't played it. But all I can say is that reviews I read of it have all been around the kind of 3 out of 5, 7 out of 10 kind of range for this game. 3.5 out of 5. That kind of era of game. So it's definitely not considered to be a system classic, but it is considered to be a decent game. Now, when you're talking about price and paying extortionate amounts of money for something, is buying a decent game really worthy of a game that's only kind of average? No, it's not. Let's be fair. If you're a sane person, you don't spend this kind of money on any game, let alone a game which isn't absolutely outstanding. And to be fair, Metal Warriors, like I had as game number 2, I do think was an outstanding game. This, because I haven't played it, so I can't be fair, but from what I read, isn't outstanding, and it is my most expensive game. And it did in fact cost me a total of £270.07. Now, as always, I've got to say that included shipping and export tax from the US. This was bought again about a year ago, so it's a relatively new edition. So it did fall into the Brexit category, so it did get hit with extortionate export tax and shipping, which is a shame. So you could probably knock, I don't know, isn't it about 20% or something like that? Well, no, it's about 10%, I think. So let's say, let's at least knock off £30 probably off that, if not £40. So it's still going to be high 200s anyway. Sorry, low 200s, but maybe 240 or even maybe perhaps even 230. But yeah, it's probably going to be at least 240 just for the game itself. And as always, if you're buying it over here and you're lucky enough to find a cartridge over here, it's going to come with very likely those prices added on top for a sale over in Europe, because whoever's got it here in Europe is going to have had to have bought it from America. So yeah, again, if you're going to the States, this is what I always say to people: if you're going over there and these games are on your list, then I would definitely try and buy them. A lot of the time you may find in shop they are just as expensive, because you're going into an actual store and they have their markups in there. So it's very difficult to get a good deal. Probably the best thing to do would be go to America and buy it on eBay in an auction, and then have it delivered to an address that you're staying at. If you can do that, that would be the perfect way to do it, to get it cheapest. But anyway, in reality, here we are with my most expensive game. Am I happy with the purchase? Certainly. Like I said, this game has been on my wish list for the longest of all, and I was very happy to finally tick it off. It marked the last time that I've decided to actually put my hand deep into a pocket and spend on a big game, because there are quite a few other games which I said at the beginning I'd do honourable mentions for. Those games would of course be Mega Man X2, Mega Man X3, Pocky and Rocky, Pocky and Rocky 2, possibly Joe and Mac 2 as well. That's a game that sells for quite a lot these days. There may well be one or two others as well that I haven't quite mentioned, that I've forgotten about, but certainly those 5 games are games that I have had on my wish list for a long time, and I have recently just decided, you know what, I don't want to spend it. Actually, there is one more, Sonic Blast Man 2. This is actually a game that I might still pick up. I think I'm going to go for a Japanese import rather than the American edition. I normally like to always get the Western release of a game, whether that initially be PAL, and if it wasn't released here, then I'll go for NTSC. But this game was released in NTSC, Sonic Blastman 2, but it wasn't released in PAL. But to be honest with you, I might just pick up a Japanese version, because you're probably looking at £100 price difference there. Another game is Captain Commando. Actually, there's another one. So that's now 7 games that I won't be picking up because their prices are just too high. They're all games that are very good for the most part. I think Captain Commando is a bit of an average beat 'em up, but the rest of them I think are all really decent games. But you know, sometimes you have to make a decision in life, and I don't think I want to add those games, but all of those 7 games would, I'm sure, sit somewhere or other in this top 10. However, that's been my top 10, and I hope you enjoy it. I hope it's given you a bit of a guide to what kind of prices you might have to pay if you wanted to acquire some of those games for your collection. Or if not, you can just admire the stupidity of a man who has spent far too much money on inanimate objects in his life, which he hopes that one day he might be able to use to benefit his children with. Maybe one day, we'll see. Hopefully these things will hold their value and my kids can get some money out of it after I'm gone. But in the meantime, they're there to be beaten, and that's what the Cabin Game Fever channel is about. So join me more in the future to see me beating all these games, and I hope you enjoy your gaming wherever it be and whatever it is.